I moved into the building on a Tuesday afternoon. It was the kind of place you pick out of desperation. Too cheap, too quiet, and too in between to feel like home. A 4-story brick structure, wedged between a pharmacy and a shuttered laundromat. The kind of building that looks the same in daylight and darkness. You could live there for years, and no one would notice you coming or going. The manager's name was Paul. He had a coffee stain on his shirt, and the sort of distracted smile people get when they're used to apologizing for the place they work. He handed me the keys, pointed to a rusty mail slot, and said, 3B, good unit. Quiet neighbors. He hesitated before adding, the 4th floor is closed for renovation. Has been for a while. The elevator wheezed as we rode up. The hallways smelled faintly of paint and something older underneath. Metal pipes, maybe, or old plaster dust. Everything had that faint, humming stillness of a building that used to be full and isn't anymore. My unit was smaller than I expected. A narrow living room with a single window facing the alley, a kitchenette with a sink that dripped every few seconds, and a bedroom with cracked white paint where someone had once hung posters. Still, I told myself it was fine. Temporary. A place to start over. That first night, I ate takeout on the floor because my furniture hadn't arrived yet. It was cold, but I liked the quiet. There's a special kind of silence in empty buildings. It's not peace, exactly, more like the air is listening. I fell asleep around midnight, with the blinds half open, streetlight leaking stripes of pale yellow across the floor. When I woke up, it was 1:13 a.m., and I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Right above me. At first, I thought maybe someone had ignored the closed for renovation sign. Maybe Paul was wrong. But the steps didn't sound random. They had a rhythm, pacing from one side of the ceiling to the other, then stopping directly over my bed. I held my breath. For a long moment, nothing. Then one more step, heavier, deliberate, and then silence again. I lay awake until dawn, telling myself it was the pipes, the heating, the building settling. Old wood makes strange noises when it cools at night. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. The next night, I left the lamp on, as if that would make a difference. It didn't. At 1:13 again, a single thud echoed above me. Then footsteps, a slow, shuffling rhythm that felt almost human, almost tired. I stood up, staring at the ceiling, and for reasons I still don't understand, I grabbed the broom from the corner and jabbed the bristles against the plaster. The sound stopped. For 5 seconds. Then something hit back. A solid, dull impact that sent a puff of dust snowing down onto the bedspread. I didn't move for the rest of the night. The room felt smaller after that. The kind of small that presses against your chest. When the morning came, I went to Paul's office downstairs. He was already half buried in paperwork, a fan blowing behind him. You said the 4th floor is closed, I told him. He looked up, confused. Yeah? I heard someone walking up there last night. He laughed a little, like he wasn't sure if it was a joke. Sound carries weird in this place, he said. Pipes, vents, could be anything. Then he leaned back in his chair and added, but if you want, I can show you. There's no one up there. He led me to the stairwell door. The top landing was sealed off with yellowing plastic taped across the frame. A dusty sign read, 4B, Maintenance Access Only. Paul tugged on the door handle, but it didn't move. The lock was old and stiff. See? He said, shrugging. No one's been in there for months. But when I leaned close, I heard something. A faint shift, like fabric brushing wood. I asked if he heard it too. He said no, and for some reason that made it worse. That night I couldn't focus on anything else. I tried watching something on my laptop, but every sound in the building felt amplified. The hum of the fridge sounded like breathing. The heater ticked like footsteps behind a wall. When the pipes groaned, I froze. I caught myself listening for a rhythm in the noise. Some sign that it wasn't random, that it was deliberate. My heartbeat started matching it without me meaning to. It's strange how quickly you can teach yourself to wait for something. By midnight, I wasn't even tired. I was just lying there waiting. And sure enough, at 1:13, the sound returned. Not footsteps this time, more like dragging. Something heavy moving across the floor above me. I sat up, phone flashlight aimed at the ceiling. Dust drifted down in faint threads when the noise passed overhead. It went on for nearly a minute, then stopped. The silence after felt almost louder. The next morning I checked the ceiling for cracks. Nothing. No damage, no marks, no reason for it. I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing, that maybe I'd been dreaming. But part of me knew I hadn't. I could still feel the vibration in my chest. By the third night, I didn't even bother pretending to sleep. I set my phone to record and placed it on the nightstand. Then I lay there, watching the clock crawl toward 1:13. When the minute changed, the room changed with it. The air felt heavier. My ears rang, like the pressure before a storm. And then it started. 3 steps. A pause. Then a slow scrape that lasted almost 5 full seconds. I stayed perfectly still. It sounded like someone dragging a chair across the floor. But slower. Rougher. Like the wood was being torn rather than moved. At one point it stopped right above me. I could hear the weight of it pressing down through the plaster. Then, just before it ended, a knock. One single knock. The sound was so sharp it made my chest hurt. It was the kind of noise that didn't fade. It just stayed there, echoing inside you. When I played the recording back the next morning, the footsteps were faint but real. And then, right after the knock, I heard breathing. Not through the microphone, through the wall itself. The sound was close. Too close. Breathing, but not mine. I deleted the file, but that didn't make it go away. For the next week, I pretended everything was normal. I went to work, came home, made dinner, scrolled my phone until I fell asleep. I told myself it was just the building, just my imagination. But every night at 1:13, it came back. Sometimes it was quiet, like distant pacing. Other times it sounded like something crawling, always above me, never anywhere else. I started noticing little things too. The air vent in my bedroom would sometimes rattle as if catching a draft, even though there was no airflow. The ceiling light flickered, but only in that one room. Once, around midnight, I was brushing my teeth and heard a faint tapping in the vent. Slow, irregular. When I turned off the faucet, it stopped. When I turned it back on, it started again. That's when I started keeping the TV on all night. Not for distraction, but to make sure I could tell when something else was moving. It's easier to notice silence when there's a little noise in the background. After a few nights, though, even that didn't help, because the sound above me started syncing with what I was doing. When I stood, it paused. When I moved toward the door, it shifted, as if following me. It felt like I wasn't just hearing it anymore. It was listening back. By the 5th night, I couldn't take it anymore. Every creak in the ceiling set off a pulse in my chest. The sound had become something predictable, almost polite. It would wait until the clock hit 1:13, then begin its quiet ritual of pacing and dragging, as though whoever or whatever it was wanted me to know they kept a schedule. I told myself that if I saw the empty space upstairs with my own eyes, the noise would stop. It had to. Fear only grows in the dark parts of the map. So the next morning I asked Paul for the key again. He looked up from his desk like he'd been expecting me, still hearing it. "Yes," I said. "Can we check 4B? He sighed, patted his pockets, found the ring of keys, then hesitated. "I can't." That lock's been changed by maintenance when? I asked. He frowned. Don't know. Been like that a while. His answer felt thin, like a draft through a cracked window. But I didn't press. If he didn't want to open it, I would. That evening I borrowed a ladder from the janitor and went into the stairwell alone. The tape that had sealed the top door was curling off in brittle strips. A small gap at the bottom breathed cold air that smelled faintly of wet dust. I crouched down and looked through. Darkness. Not black, but the gray of a room with blinds half closed. The kind of dimness that seems to move when you stare too long. I almost called out, but my throat tightened before the words came. What would I have said? Hello? To what? I went back downstairs and locked my own door twice. That night I slept on the couch with the lights on. It didn't help. At 1:13, the ceiling gave a single, hollow thud. Then another. And then. Silence so deep, it made my ears ring. I waited, gripping the edge of the blanket, eyes fixed on the ceiling above the couch. A few seconds later, the sound resumed, but this time it was softer, closer, like something crawling rather than walking. I whispered to no one, "Stop!" And for a few heartbeats, it did. Then a faint scrape traveled across the plaster right above my head. I don't remember falling asleep. I must have passed out from exhaustion. The next morning there was fine white dust on the coffee table. A perfect circle of it, directly under the light fixture. I wiped it away, but the mark of my hand stayed visible, like the dust had come from inside the ceiling rather than above it. Later that day, I ran into Paul in the hallway. He looked tired, eyes rimmed red. Before I could speak, he said, "If it's about the noise, I told maintenance to look into it. They'll be around soon." Then, he added quietly, "Try not to go upstairs, okay?" I asked him why. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Insurance thing. When he walked away, I noticed his hand trembling as he fished for his cigarettes. That night I decided to leave my phone recording again, but this time I placed it in the kitchen, right beneath the loudest part of the ceiling. I sat in the dark and listened through my earbuds in real time. At 1:13, the familiar drag began. The sound was crisp through the mic. Wood fibers groaning, a slow weight shifting. Then something new, a faint rhythmic tapping, like fingers on a table. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. I pulled the earbuds out. The sound kept going. Not through the phone, through the air itself. I turned the kitchen light on. It flickered once and stayed dim. The ceiling looked fine, flat white, still. But the tapping continued for another 20 seconds, then stopped with a single, dull impact, as if someone had laid their hand flat in warning. I didn't move until the refrigerator compressor kicked on again, breaking the silence. That small, ordinary noise felt like rescue. After a week without real sleep, I started losing track of the days. My body kept moving, working, eating, answering emails. But my mind felt a few seconds behind everything. Every sound in the apartment seemed to blend into a single low note that followed me around like tinnitus. I began timing my evenings by the distance to 1:13 a.m., counting hours instead of living them. Sometimes I tried to stay awake on purpose, sitting in the chair by the window with a book in my hands, but I'd catch myself reading the same line over and over. The words meant nothing. My eyes just needed something to point at while I listened. When you lose sleep, the world starts to bend in small ways. Colors drain out of things. Time stutters, and silence stops being comfort. It turns into pressure. That Friday I came home from work and found a slip of paper pushed under my door. No name, just a few typed lines. "Please stop making noise at night. Some of us have to sleep." I turned it over. Blank. No apartment number. No handwriting. I wasn't the one making noise. But someone thought I was, that night, Instead of waiting for 1:13, I left. I went for a walk around the block, telling myself that if I came back after 2, the pattern would break, that maybe I'd reset whatever strange coincidence was happening. The city felt colder than it should have, the kind of cold that doesn't touch your skin, but sits under it. When I came back around 2:30, the hallway lights on the 3rd floor were off. They'd been on every other night. I used my phone flashlight to find my key, and when I pushed the door open, the apartment smelled wrong, like wet wood and burnt dust. The lamp in the corner was still on, but dimmer than before. And on the kitchen table sat the paper I'd left on the counter that morning, the note from under my door, now folded in half. I hadn't touched it. I told myself there was a draft. The door sometimes rattled when trucks passed outside. Still, I didn't unfold the paper. I just dropped it into the trash and went to the bathroom to wash my hands. When I came back, the trash can was empty. The note was gone. Saturday morning, I went to find Paul. His office door was closed, but I could hear the radio inside. When I knocked, he didn't answer. Through the frosted glass, I could see movement, a shadow pacing slowly from one side of the room to the other. I knocked again. The shadow stopped. Then the radio clicked off. After a few seconds, I heard the chair squeak, and the sound of the lock sliding open. Paul looked older, paler. He gestured for me to come in without saying anything. I asked him if he'd heard anything about complaints from other tenants. He shook his head. Then I asked if he'd been upstairs recently. His expression changed. Not surprise. More like hesitation that I'd been waiting for an excuse. He said quietly, "They sealed that floor because of water damage." I asked when that happened. He said, "Last spring." There hadn't been any rain for weeks. I wanted to ask more, but the way his hands gripped the edge of the desk stopped me. He looked like a man trying not to say something he'd already said once before. Before I left, he told me, "If you hear it again, just ignore it. It's safer that way." Safer for who? I didn't ask. That night, I locked the door, turned off every light, and lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The quiet stretched so thin it hummed. Minutes passed, then an hour. 1:12. I held my breath. 1:13. The footsteps started. Soft at first, almost careful, then heavier, moving slowly toward the center of the ceiling, right above me. I whispered, "Who's there?" The sound stopped. Then 3 quick knocks in a row. It wasn't random. It was an answer. I sat up, heart hammering, and for the first time I shouted, "Stop it!" The echo of my own voice filled the apartment. But what came next wasn't an echo. It was a reply. A single knock, hard enough to rattle the picture frame on the wall. After that, there was only the sound of my breathing and the faint hiss of air through the vent, as if the building itself were sighing. I didn't sleep. I just waited for morning to prove I was still sane. Morning light makes everything look smaller. It flattens the corners of fear until you can almost pretend it was never there. I told myself that when I finally saw what was above me in daylight, all of this would end. I bought a cheap stepladder from the hardware store and spent half the afternoon staring at the ceiling in my bedroom, trying to find the exact spot where the knocks had sounded the loudest. There was a faint line where the paint looked newer, a thin rectangle of plaster that didn't quite match, an access panel. I stood on the ladder and pressed my fingers along the edges. The metal frame was cold. When I pushed, it shifted a little and released a soft breath of dust that smelled like old insulation. I thought about lifting it higher, but the quiet of the building held me in place. The kind of stillness that feels like waiting. Finally, I stepped down, closed the window blinds, and sat at the kitchen table until the sun went down. When night came, I left the ladder where it was. If something was up there, I wanted to see what it would do about it. At 1:13, the footsteps began again. Slow, careful. They stopped directly above the panel. A moment later, the ceiling gave a small dry creak, like weight shifting on old boards. Then nothing. I stayed awake until the sky started to turn gray, half expecting to see that panel moved, half hoping I never would. When I finally looked, there was a new smear of dust beside it, a single fingerprint dragged across the paint. I called Paul first thing in the morning. No answer. I tried again in the afternoon. The line rang until the voicemail clicked on. His recorded voice sounded distant, thinner than usual. Leave a message. I'll get back to you. But the background wasn't silent. There was a faint dripping noise, steady, like water from a leaky pipe. I hung up before the tone. Around 5 that evening, I heard someone walking in the hallway outside my door. 2 sets of footsteps, low voices, then the sound of keys. I opened the door. A man in a gray uniform looked up, surprised. He introduced himself as maintenance, said he was checking the plumbing in the unit above mine. I asked, 4B. He nodded, then frowned. Yeah, how'd you know? He stepped past me toward the stairwell without waiting for an answer. I followed him halfway up before he turned. Sir, you can't be up here. It's not safe. I told him I'd been hearing noises for weeks. He hesitated, then said quietly, Yeah, we've been getting reports from this side of the building. He unlocked the door to 4B. The hinges groaned. A smell rolled out, metallic, stale. The man clicked on his flashlight and disappeared inside. I waited. A minute. 2. Then the beam of light flickered across the doorway, and he re-emerged, expression blank. Just empty rooms, he said. Dust, broken pipe. I'll seal it back up. He locked the door again and walked away. As he passed, I noticed something dark on his sleeve. A thin streak of rust-colored stain. That night I sat by the window, watching the shadows of the neighboring buildings stretch across mine. I told myself that the man had fixed whatever needed fixing, that tonight would be silent. It almost was. The first sound didn't come until after 2. Not footsteps this time. A low thud, followed by another, in a pattern too steady to be random. I realized with a tightening in my chest that it was coming from the wall, not the ceiling. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. I pressed my ear against the paint. Behind it, something scraped gently along the studs. A slow tracing motion, as if mapping the outline of my apartment from the inside. I whispered, Stop! The sound paused. Then a soft tap answered, right beside my ear. I stumbled backward and left the light on until morning. The wall was still, but when the sunlight hit it just right, I could see faint smears of dust where my breath had fogged the paint. I didn't go to work on Monday. I sat in the kitchen with the blinds drawn, the clock ticking in uneven beats like it was mocking me. The air felt different, heavier somehow, like the building was leaning closer to listen. I'd started leaving the TV on in the other room just for company, but even the sound of people talking on screen didn't help anymore. It all felt staged, like they were pretending not to know what was happening here. Around noon, I finally went upstairs again. The door to 4B was still locked, the edges of the frame newly sealed with tape that looked too clean to be old. A white sticker hung crooked across the lock. Notice. Do not enter, printed in big block letters. No signature, no logo, no reason. I pressed my ear against the door. At first, nothing. Then, just at the edge of hearing, the faint hum of air moving, like an open vent somewhere deeper inside. I stayed there for a long time, hand flat against the cold wood, until a vibration ran through it. A single, slow pulse. It wasn't a sound. It was movement. I backed away, went downstairs, and poured a glass of water that I didn't drink. By evening, the air in my apartment felt stale, as if it had already been breathed in by someone else. The silence pressed against the windows, And even though I knew the pattern, I still waited for 113. It came like clockwork. 3 soft knocks above the kitchen, then dragging, slow and heavy, and then something new. A faint tapping near the vent by the window. I turned off the lamp. The tapping continued. A slow rhythm, irregular, like someone running their fingers along the inside of the metal grate. I took a step closer. The sound stopped. Then, from inside the vent, a quiet exhale. I turned the light back on, grabbed a screwdriver from the drawer, and removed the front plate. Behind it, nothing but blackness. I shone my phone flashlight inside. The beam caught on dust motes and insulation, nothing more. Still, I felt the cold air against my skin, as if something had just pulled back from the opening. I reattached the cover, then sat on the couch with my phone in my hand. Screen on. Camera app open. Aimed at the ceiling. If it happened again, I'd catch it. I needed proof. Something I could show someone else. Something that would make it real. At 1:14, the app froze. The image on screen jittered for half a second, then went black. When it came back, the angle had changed, as if the phone had been moved, but it was still in my hand. The picture showed my ceiling, but with a faint outline. A square patch, darker than the rest. The same access panel from before. I looked up. It was closed, perfectly still. When I lowered the phone again, the photo had disappeared. The screen showed only static. I don't know how long I sat there. Time had started melting into itself, the hours slipping between my fingers like water. Every sound became suspect. The refrigerator, the pipes, the elevator down the hall. All of them could have been the same thing wearing different masks. That night I packed a bag. Just essentials. Wallet, charger, toothbrush, a change of clothes. I planned to leave before midnight, find a motel, maybe call a friend. But when I reached for the doorknob, it wouldn't turn. Not locked. Just stiff, unmoving, as if pressure from the other side held it shut. I pulled harder. It didn't budge. I leaned my weight against it, and something on the other side leaned back. For a moment, the air between us felt alive. 2 forces pressing on the same space. Then the pressure eased. The door opened easily, swinging outward into an empty hallway. I didn't breathe until I was standing by the stairwell. The light flickered once, and from the floor above came a slow, dragging sound, moving toward me. I ran. I didn't stop running until I was outside. The air felt colder than it should have, sharp enough to sting. I stood on the sidewalk staring up at the windows of the building, waiting for some movement, a shadow, anything that could prove I hadn't lost my mind. Nothing moved. The building looked ordinary again. A stack of dark rectangles against a pale sky. Silent. Solid. Still. I checked into a motel 2 blocks away. One of those places where the carpet smells like soap and the lights buzz when you turn them on. I slept for 12 straight hours. When I woke, my body felt heavy, but my mind was quiet. For the first time in weeks, the silence didn't hum. I told myself it was over. I even thought about calling Paul to apologize, to admit that the noises had probably been plumbing after all. But when I dialed, his number went straight to voicemail. The same message played. Leave a message. I'll get back to you. Except this time, the dripping in the background had stopped. Now there was only a faint static hiss, like air moving through an empty room. I didn't leave a message. By the next day, I convinced myself I'd imagined most of it. Exhaustion does strange things. I packed my bag, paid for another night just in case, and walked back to the apartment building before dusk. I told myself I was only going to grab the rest of my stuff. I'd be in and out in 10 minutes. The hallway smelled the same. Paint, dust, stale air. The third floor lights were back on. Nothing looked disturbed. When I reached my door, the knob turned easily, like it had never stuck at all. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. The ladder in the bedroom, the dishes in the sink, even the folded blanket on the couch. Only one thing was different. The ceiling panel above the bed was open, not fallen, not cracked, just open, tilted slightly to one side as if someone had pushed it from below. A rectangle of shadow where the light should have been. I stood there for a long time. No sounds, no movement, only the faint smell of dust and something older underneath, like wood that's been wet and dried too many times. I don't remember deciding to climb the ladder. I just found myself doing it, each step creaking under my weight. When I reached the top, I shone my flashlight into the gap. The beam caught insulation, wooden beams, and a trail of footprints in the dust. Bare, small, leading away from the opening into darkness. The space above wasn't as shallow as I thought. It went back several feet, maybe more. I called out once, my voice flat against the wood. No answer. I listened. At first, just the blood in my ears. Then, very faintly, a sound like fabric shifting. Someone breathing slow, trying not to. I jerked the flashlight back toward the opening and climbed down, nearly tripping on the last step. When I looked up again, the panel was closed. I locked the door, sat on the floor, and waited for morning. Every few minutes, I checked the ceiling. No sound, no change. At sunrise, I went downstairs to find Paul. The office door was open this time. The radio still sat on his desk, but it wasn't playing. Dust covered everything, and the chair behind the desk was empty. There was a faint mark on the wall behind it. A circular stain the color of rust, spreading out like something had leaked through from above. On the desk was a single key, attached to a faded label that read 4B. I don't know why I took it. Maybe because I needed proof. Maybe because I didn't believe there was anything left to find. I climbed the stairs to the top floor again. The tape over the door was gone. The "Do Not Enter" sticker lay curled on the floor. I slid the key into the lock. It turned easily. The air that met me was cold and damp. Light from the stairwell stretched just far enough to show a corner of the floor. Bare boards, scattered nails, dust thick like powder. A mattress leaned against the wall, its fabric stained with something dark. The rest of the room dissolved into shadow. I should have left. Every part of me knew it. But I stepped inside anyway. The door shut quietly behind me. The air in 4B was colder than the hallway. Not the kind of cold that bites the skin, but the kind that fills your lungs and stays there, like breathing in a basement after the rain. The floor creaked under every step, each sound stretched too long, echoing off bare walls that seemed thinner than they should have been. I walked toward the center of the room, flashlight trembling in my hand, beam cutting across floating dust. There was almost nothing here. A broken chair, a mug half filled with stale water, a mattress pressed flat against the wall, its edges stained and frayed. Someone had been living here. Not months ago. Recently. Near the far corner, a faint square of light leaked down from the ceiling. I tilted the flashlight upward and saw it. A hole. Small, neat, exactly the same shape as the access panel in my bedroom below. It wasn't the ceiling to this apartment. It was the floor to mine. I stepped closer, half expecting to see daylight through the gap, but it was dark, an empty space between floors, a narrow crawl filled with wood, dust, and something else. A shape, barely visible, curled in the shadows, unmoving. I stood there frozen, watching as the dust swirled in slow circles above it. And then the shape moved. Just slightly. A shift of weight, a quiet intake of breath. It was a person. Small, thin, curled beneath the floorboards of my apartment, breathing in time with the building. I stumbled backward. The beam of the flashlight jerked up the wall and caught the outline of the door behind me, closed again. When had that happened? I tried the handle. It didn't turn. The key in my pocket felt suddenly heavy, useless. Behind me, the sound of breathing grew louder, still slow, still steady, but closer now, moving toward the hole in the floor. I pounded on the door. No one answered. The air felt thick, humming. Every breath came out white, every sound echoing twice. Then a voice, faint, muffled from somewhere beneath the floorboards. It said just one word. Down! The sound of wood straining followed. A long, low crack that spread across the room. The floor shifted under my feet. I dropped the flashlight. Its beam spun wildly across the walls before landing on the mattress. Someone had written on it. Words scratched into the fabric in uneven lines. Don't let it upstairs. I turned the handle again, and this time it moved. The door swung open, and light from the stairwell spilled into the room. I didn't look back. I ran. Down the stairs, past my floor, past the lobby, out into the street where the night air felt like something real again. I didn't stop running until I reached the corner. When I finally turned around, the windows on the top floor were dark. All but one. A single light burned in 4B. It flickered once, then went out. I moved out the next morning. No one stopped me. Paul's office was still empty, a layer of dust already forming on the desk. When I turned in my key to a woman at the front desk, someone I'd never seen before, she looked at the number on the tag and frowned. "We don't have a 3B, she said. Then she checked the list again. Third floor only has 2 units, A and C. I didn't answer. I just nodded, set the key on the counter, and left. I found another place a few weeks later, a smaller apartment, one where the ceilings felt closer, the walls newer. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, around 1:13. There's no sound now. No footsteps, no dragging, no breathing. But every once in a while, when the building settles and the air ducts expand, I hear a faint knock. Just one, as if something underneath the floor is testing for a way back up.